Hi, welcome to part 8 of Buying a New Roof. I'm Todd Miller, and this video is sponsored by Asktoddmiller.com. In part 8, we want to discuss how you go about making your final selection on a contractor who's going to do the work on your roof, and how you then write and have a contract drawn up between the two of you. As we've discussed before, this idea of choosing the contractor is very critical. You can choose the best possible product, and if it's not put up right, you might as well have chosen the worst possible product. So finding the right contractor is critical. In part 7, we talked quite a bit about how to find the right contractor and steps to go through. One thing I do want to mention here in part 8 is as you start to narrow down your selection and choose a contractor, you want to make sure that you get from them all appropriate information as far as copies of licenses that are required to do business in your location. There may be a state contractor's license required. There may be a local business license required. You want to make sure that you get copies of their insurance forms. You want to make sure that their workers are covered under whatever your state's program is for workers' compensation. The big thing is to make sure that if anything happens on the job site where one of their workers gets hurt or your property gets damaged, you want to make sure that they have the proper insurance to verify that you will not be responsible for either one of those events. So again, you need to talk to them about this, get copies of their insurance policies, make sure that they are in force, make sure it's not an old policy that perhaps has lapsed at this point. You also want to check any other certification they have. I always suggest it's always a good idea to find out from the contractor what sort of associations, Better Business Bureau, Chamber of Commerce, National Roofing Contractors, what sort of organizations they are members of. You don't necessarily need copies of that stuff, but it does help you know a little bit about the contractor, their credibility, and as we talked about in part 7, their staying power, how likely they are to still be around in your area in future years if you need them again. The other thing I want to specify that you want to talk to them about is warranty, and we talked about this in part 7, but just a reminder, you should receive 2 warranties at the end of your project. You should receive a materials warranty from the manufacturer of the roofing materials, and you should also receive a workmanship warranty from the contractor who installs the roofing. These are 2 separate warranties covered by 2 separate entities and covering 2 separate things. One's covering materials, the other is covering the workmanship that went into putting those materials up on your roof. Very, very critical before you sign a contract that you fully understand what you're going to be getting as far as warranties, and that you receive copies in writing on both those warranties. A lot of contractors do not have a workmanship warranty in writing, and I think it's a real mistake to work with someone who doesn't, because you want to verify for certain exactly what is and is not covered in the future in the event that the roofing project does not go as successful as we hope it does. Now, when you go to having a contractor, a contract written up between you and the contractor, I want to say that most misunderstandings in horror stories that you hear about homeowners and contractors usually stem from a lack of clarity and a lack of understanding on exactly what the project is to entail. So for that reason, I really suggest having a contract that is extremely detailed. You want a contract that definitely specifies exactly what sort of products are being installed, and that could be the roofing material, it could be underlayment, it could be venting materials like a ridge vent, it could be other sorts of flashings. You want to make sure that your contract spells out exactly what materials are being provided, and you want to also make sure that your contract spells out exactly the scope of the work being done. If, for example, the old shingles are being torn off, that needs to be specified in the contract. If, for example, new decking is being put on your roof, that needs to be specified in the contract. If anything is being done regarding ventilation, there again, it needs to be specified in the contract. Back in one of our earlier episodes, we talked about special circumstances that may exist on your roof. If any of those special circumstances, as you've talked through them with your contractor, if any of those special circumstances have resulted in special things that have to be done to the roof, again, you want to make sure that is spelled out in the contract. Now, at the time of contract, it's also a good time to make sure that you know what, if anything, is being done as far as ventilation in your attic. In a previous episode of how to buy a new roof, we talked a lot about ventilation. how to determine if your attic needs additional ventilation, and we looked at the different options for achieving that additional ventilation. Before you sign a contract, again, make sure you talk to your contractor about ventilation, and again, if you're going to have any additional ventilation added to the attic space, make sure that that gets specified in the contract as well. Now, one of the things that you're going to be most interested in, you want to make sure it's a part of your contract, is the terms, your payment terms, whether you're paying a certain amount down, maybe a certain amount midway, or maybe a certain amount when materials are delivered, and then the balance upon completion of your job. Don't be, horribly afraid if they're looking for some money down or some money when the materials deliver. Really, that's kind of a good faith thing. I mean, once you have committed to having the work done with them, would not be unreal or unrealistic for a contractor to expect you to pay some money at that time. I probably, unless you're buying something real exotic where they're having to bring in some very special order expensive materials, as a general rule, I probably would not look to have paid for any more than 50% of the job by the time the job is done. So as a general rule, when the job is completed, you should owe 50% or more of the project. You should not owe less than 50% at the time that the project is completed. Again, make sure that the contract spells all this stuff out exactly, what it's going to cost and how you're going to pay it, what the terms are. You also want your contract to specify that all change orders, if anything comes up during the project that requires something different being done, usually that means something that might cost you extra money. Let's say that there's a possibility that they may get into the roof and find out that there have been previous roof leaks that have to be addressed, and maybe there's some lumber that has to be replaced. You want to make sure that your contract specifies how these sort of change orders are going to be handled. My recommendation is that change orders should always be in writing and should only be with approval. So you don't want to give them the okay, yeah, if you run into something, go ahead and take care of it and let me know how much I owe later. Don't do it that way. Make sure that you require that change orders be in writing and they have prior approval before the work proceeds. Make sure that the contract also specifies, or some maybe addendum to the contract or supplementary materials, specifies who you contact if you have any questions during the project. You want to know if you're supposed to contact the crew foreman, if you go back to your salesman, if maybe they have an expediter or a operations manager you're supposed to go to. Make sure you know exactly who it is that you're supposed to go to if you have any questions during the time that the work is being done. I would also suggest on a contract that you specify the start and the end dates of the project. You want them to go ahead and say, hey, the project's going to start no later than this date, and we will be done no later than this date, or no later than X amount of time after the start date. Make sure that all that stuff, all of that information is specified in the contract that you have with your contractor. Thank you very much for tuning in to Buying a New Roof, Part 8. I really appreciate your time here, and I encourage you to visit my website at Asktoddmiller.com, or feel free to email me at todd@asktoddmiller.com. In future episodes of this video series, we're going to be talking about additional information and additional ways to make sure that you have a successful roofing project that accomplishes the criteria that you determined that you wanted to accomplish with your new roof. And again, that was in part 1 of this video series. Thank you.